Hello and welcome. I'm Tracey Polowich, host of the Excellence Connection podcast, where we connect our listeners with subject matter experts, knowledge, and resources to help along the excellence journey and make organizational improvements. Today, my guest is Peter Merrill. Peter is president at Quest Management, Inc., and a keynote speaker on innovation. He is an engineer, an artist, and a writer, and has led innovation in the fields of both graphic art and engineering. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Good morning, Tracey, and a pleasure to be here. And I'm looking forward to talking about innovation.
I'm so excited for this episode. And I know you've written a number of books, but there's a few that you've written on innovation. Innovation Never Stops, Innovation Generation, and the Executive Guide to Innovation. And today we are talking about innovation, specifically continuous improvement and how to increase creativity and innovation. Before we get into all my questions, Peter, I'll give you an opportunity to give the listeners a bit of your background and experience.
Well, yes. You mentioned my past experience. I didn't realize all those years ago that my career was pointing me to the world of innovation. I started in R&D, and I went into, I left the large corporation I was with after a few years and started my own business in, of all things, fashion design. But that was more of a training ground in entrepreneurship. I went back to the large corporation, and actually that experience out there on my own was incredibly useful because I progressed very rapidly and eventually became chief executive of one of the leading brands in the Courtaulds Corporation. It's a British corporation. And that's where I learned about innovation in design, graphic design. So I've worked in both areas, the chemical industry and the fashion industry. They couldn't be more diverse. And I think that equips me for today's world of innovation. It's probably worth mentioning that my transition, though, when I eventually left the large corporation, I joined Philip Crosby and worked with him. He was one of the gurus of quality management. And I've been very involved in quality for a number of years. But going back 15 years ago, I could see the world moving beyond quality management. And innovation is really quality for tomorrow, finding out what tomorrow's customer wants. The quality movement tends to be focused much more on today. So that's an interesting definition, quality for tomorrow. So back to you, Tracey.
Yes, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. And so we can get into my questions. So what is innovation? You've sort of started to touch on that, but why should organizations pursue it? What's in it for them?
Well, the bottom line, more than anything else, research has shown that companies that innovate are overall far more profitable than companies that don't. Companies that keep sort of milking the cash cow eventually fade away and disappear. And that leads us into the other reason, or the second reason anyway, for innovating, long-term survival. And you've only got to look at the classic story of Netflix and compare it with Blockbuster. Blockbuster could have looked to the future, but they didn't. They kept renting videotapes. Netflix started developing streaming movies in 2007. They were looking to the future. They were being strategic. And a good example of a company that absolutely ignored innovation is Kodak. They invented the digital camera 30-something years ago, and yet they ignored it because they were making money selling rolls of film. So you can't ignore the future. And I'm going to give you a second definition. It's one that I heard at a conference 3 or 4 years ago now. And it's a definition I love. Innovation is something new that makes people happy. And we tend to forget the emotional part of innovation. That's why people enjoy it. People who are customers enjoy new things that make their life easier and more convenient and make them happy. But also, people inside organizations enjoy innovation. And it might sound a bit flaky, but there's a lot of work being done on happiness. And the two big factors that make people happy are meaningful relationships and a sense of achievement. And when you look at how we innovate by working with other people, by partnering, collective knowledge. And the end game, when we get the result, is what makes us happy as well. So a lot of reasons for innovating, certainly in my book.
Yes, it sounds like it's very strongly tied to long-term sustainability for corporations and organizations. So when I think of innovation and creativity, I think of artists and designers and people operating in less structured environments. Can you structure innovation and creativity?
Most definitely. And this is the big myth. People tend to think that innovation is something magic that sort of drops out of the sky. And you know, when we don't have skills in an area like painting or writing, we tend to be awed, shall I say, by what those people do. But they have a process. And one of the things I enjoy when I have the time is painting. And I have a framework. You know, I use certain brushes, I use certain paints. If I'm doing oil painting, I use canvas. If I'm doing watercolor, I use a particular type of paper. All of those create the framework, but I also have a process. And the process for the artist is exactly the same as the innovator. The innovator starts by seeing an opportunity. A lot of people mistakenly think that innovation starts in the laboratory. No, it doesn't. It starts out there in the marketplace. And quoting Plato, all those 2000 plus years ago, he said, necessity is the mother of invention. Well, I'll adapt that to say, need is the mother of innovation. And so the innovator starts by seeing opportunity. They then develop alternative concepts, alternative solutions to the opportunity. They define the problem, they find alternative solutions. They then select the preferred solution. Well, this might not sound like what an artist does, but it is. An artist starts with inspiration. It's the same as opportunity. Opportunities inspire the innovator. Inspiration inspires the artist. And, you know, I see a particular view. When I lived in Europe, I used to like to paint old buildings. Now, living in Canada, I like to paint scenes, country scenes. And I'll see a particular scene and the color will inspire me. That's the first step. The second step is to develop alternative concepts. And a great example of this is Leonardo da Vinci. He would produce a multitude of sketches for an idea that he'd got, an opportunity that he'd seen. And those sketches now sell for vast amounts of money. But having produced the sketches will narrow down to a preferred approach. And that's the third step in the innovation process. We select the preferred solution. We focus. And the fourth step is to develop a working solution. And that's what the innovator has to do. Make a solution that really works for the user. In the case of the artist, they produce their work of art. And the final solution, the final step is to deliver the solution. Well, usually an artist has got, you know, in the old days, they had somebody who would promote them, and they would perhaps be painting for the king or a prince or something like that. Today, artists tend to produce things for themselves and for the general public. The innovator has to deliver their solution. And if they don't deliver, the solution's worthless. So very strong similarities between the field of art and design and the field of innovation.
Yeah, there sounds to be some structure to that, as you've explained. So myself, I'm an accountant, and so I always joke that my brother, he's an artist, and he got the right brain, I got the left brain. And so I wonder, can uncreative people contribute to innovation?
Most definitely. And I'm going to give you another quote, Tracey, and that's from Thomas Edison. He said, "Genius is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration." And that's the fourth step in the process that I just described, the development of the working solution. That's where all the hard work is. And if you go to my company website, there are two ways of getting there, petermerrill.com or questmgt.com. There is actually a self-assessment there where people can find where they fit best in the sequence of steps in innovation. I actually sit best in the development stage, and that's probably because of my original engineering background. But I do have a little bit of a bias towards the very first step, the origination, the opportunity. But people generally tend to think, well, unless I'm creative, I can't be part of innovation. Absolutely not. Delivery is critical. If we don't deliver, innovation has no value. So development and delivery are where the left brain people will flourish. The right brain creative people will flourish more in the earlier steps, the creative steps of opportunity and concept solution.
That's cool. And what do you say to organizations who want to innovate but may not have adequate resources to support innovative initiatives?
Well, again, I'm going to quote research. About 4 or 5 years ago, there was a great article in Harvard Business Review by Paul Leonardi. His research showed that 95% of innovators partner. Partnering is absolutely vital for successful innovation. The idea of the lone genius, absolute myth. There will be 1 or 2 people do it all on their own, but really successful innovators will partner with others. Now, that sounds like just going out and finding friends, but it's a bit more complicated than that. Partnerships can be very formal, they can be informal. But one of the things we have to be careful about, we pick our partners carefully because IP is a big issue. Intellectual property, who owns it, and focusing on people we can work with. Somebody may have a particular market knowledge, a particular technical expertise, but if we can't work with them, you know, there's going to be conflict. And, you know, I frequently get people saying, well, I'd like to collaborate with you, Peter. I say, sure, yeah. So collaboration's a two-way street. What do you think I can give you? What can you give me? I just ask that simple question. And quite often, unfortunately, I find they're looking to get what they can from me, and they're not necessarily finding they're going to give very much in the other direction. So partnerships are a two-way street, and we need to pick our partners carefully, but we want to pick people in areas where we are not proficient. We can't be good at everything. And so for a small organization just starting out, yes, they'll have a bright idea. They've got to test it in the market. They may not have the skills for doing that. And because something excites us personally, doesn't mean to say that it's going to excite everybody out there in the market. So finding somebody who can do the ethnographic research, the market research, and all of that is probably one of the first steps in partnering. Somewhere down the road, if you're not a software specialist, you're probably going to need somebody who's got software skills that you're going to partner with. And so it goes on as you move through the innovation journey. I hope that gives you an idea of how a small company doesn't have to do it on its own.
Yes, and it really emphasizes our organizational excellence model and the interrelatedness and integratedness of the model and the different key management areas. And while we're talking today about continuous improvement, you're bringing in the idea that suppliers and partners are very key to the success with innovation as well. And I liked that example to demonstrate that. So, Peter, you offer the option of starting with strategy or starting with process. What are the benefits of each of these approaches, and when is each best to be used?
Okay, and this touches on the new innovation standard, which I'm very involved in. I'm actually the project lead on the new ISO 56001. A lot of people say, standards, innovation? No. Well, actually, that's because they don't understand what standards are. 56002, which is the guidance on innovation management, is actually an enormous body of knowledge on innovation. And what that gives us is these two alternatives, starting with strategy or starting with process. I find that organizations who are cautious will tend to start with process. Larger organizations will definitely have to start with strategy. Strategy is looking out into the marketplace to see broad opportunities, doing a risk analysis on the various opportunities, and selecting the preferred area of opportunity. And that's what you do with strategy. You find the area. With process, you're much more focused. You've got a specific opportunity that you've identified. So process flows out of strategy. And I mentioned a moment ago the 5 steps. I'll repeat them. Step 1 is find the opportunity. And that's where we would use tools like ethnographic research, going out and seeing where people have challenges. Step 2 is developing alternative concepts. And that's the classic perception of innovation, the brainstorming, the ideation, as we call it, idea creation, the sort of freewheeling kind of stuff. And that's what people find very exciting. And they tend to think that's everything. But as I mentioned previously, it's only the beginning. We select our preferred solution at the middle step, the validation, step 3. And then we go into developing a working solution, step 4, and then we deliver it. If a company sees a very clear and very specific opportunity that comes to it, then starting with process is fine. And very often, a customer will come to an organization and say, look, we need this. Can you develop it? So the opportunity has been presented to the company. Last year, I spent the year helping one of the companies in the automotive sector develop their innovation management system. And they would get regular requests from the big 3 to produce particular products. They're seeing new opportunities in the area of electric vehicles. Everybody's getting excited about that. And we don't realize what changes those are going to produce. Even things like floor coverings are going to have to be different with electric vehicles. So a lot of innovation opportunity in the automotive sector because of the macro shift to EVs. That's a strategic shift. The process shift is what the suppliers have got to deal with. And they go through those 5 steps. And one thing I want to mention in those 5 steps, when the opportunity comes, we need a very clear problem definition. And I'm going to give you another quote. And as you gather by now, I love my quotes, Tracey. And it comes from the great man, Albert Einstein. And he said, if I had an hour to save the world, I'd spend 55 minutes defining the problem. And that's what people don't do. They don't define the problem. They don't get clarity on the opportunity. So those are my thoughts on strategy and process. And I would say overall, you probably want to be running the 2 in parallel. When you're getting started in innovation, you want an early win, a success, and that's where your process will give you the early win. But you do need to pursue strategy as well.
Awesome. And so you mentioned the importance of defining the problem well before you start to identify solutions. Do you have any hints for how to go about defining the problem?
This is probably the toughest question of all. And it really comes down to saying, what's going wrong? What's not working? A classic example I'll share with you of where I did not define the problem correctly. It's probably a better way of illustrating this. Some years ago, I had a very nice vehicle. It was getting old. It was, dare I mention it, a Ford Thunderbird. I loved that car. It was a great car. And I was looking under the hood one day and I realized the fan belt was starting to get frayed. So I took it into the service center and got the fan belts replaced. And, you know, it wasn't 1, it was 3 fan belts on this thing. It was a monster engine. And fine, paid my bill. And a couple of days later, I pulled up at some stoplights and the car cut out. And I thought, would you believe it? This always happens. You take your car in for some work and then more work needs doing. So it kept going on like this for 2 or 3 days. And I thought, got to get it sorted. So I went to a different garage, actually. And I was with a client who was just across the street. And I left it with them. And I got a phone call at 10 o'clock. And the guy in the garage said, have you had any work done on this recently? I said, well, yes, I had the fan belts replaced. He said, well, that's the problem. He said, when they replaced the fan belts, they didn't replace the air hose. They left it loose. When I took my car into the second garage, I said, this car needs a tune-up. In other words, I was defining the solution. I was being too clever. What I should have said was, this car keeps cutting out at the stoplights, because that was the problem. It kept cutting out at the stoplights. So what we have to do is more of a case of discipline, not try to be too clever and jump to what we think is the solution, but simply state what is not working. Where are we having difficulty? And a good example of getting a problem defined goes back close 20 years ago with Lego. Their business was in serious trouble. Their problem was kids did not want Lego anymore. So they sent researchers out, ethnographic researchers. They watched kids playing. And what they found was that when kids play, they talk to their toys. We've all seen it. They're actually telling a story as they play with their toys. And Lego learned that their product needed to be built around stories, not around putting bricks together. And so again, that was an example of finding out exactly what is the problem and defining it. Hoping those two examples give you an idea of defining the problem and not defining the solution.
Yes, that happens a lot, doesn't it? Where we always want to, if there's something wrong, we want to rush to fix it. And we don't really take the time to step back and really evaluate what's going on and how it should best be fixed, you know, for the most optimal solution. So I like what you said about having that discipline and, you know, coming back to some of these tools that help you to really define the problem.
And I just add to that, Tracey, it's actually deeply cultural. In most companies, the boss will say, don't give me problems, give me solutions. So we're actually trained in our company culture to jump to solutions rather than really defining the problem first. I just wanted to add that to your thoughts there.
Yes, and speaking of culture, that's one of my next questions is how important is culture with respect to innovation?
Yeah, and culture, another quote from Deal and Kennedy, who wrote the very first book on company culture. They said, culture is the way we do things around here. And for a startup, it's not usually a problem. But whether it's a startup or a large organization, culture is defined by leaders' behaviors, and especially by the behaviors of leaders when there's a crisis. And the way leaders behave in crisis defines the behaviors of the rest of the people. It's almost intuitive. And we have become very used in the last 20, 30 years to an execution culture. I don't mean killing people. I mean getting things done, getting results. And that lines up very much with the culture of quality. And it tends to subvert creativity. It doesn't allow creativity. We don't have time for it. And so one of the big challenges in organizations is how to allow the looseness of creativity with the tightness of execution and delivery. And there are different ways of dealing with this. A lot of large companies have spun off their creative work. Even going back to World War II, Lockheed Martin developed what they called skunk works. And they put all their creative people in a sort of little shed at the bottom of the garden where they wouldn't mess up the day-to-day works. More recently, Procter & Gamble were having real problems getting through their R&D. It was taking 5 years to get things to market. They subcontracted their creativity to a company called Incentive. But the approach I like best of all is with a company called W.L. Gore. Probably most people have not heard of them, but they will have heard of Gore-Tex. Gore-Tex is the outdoor fabric. Bill Gore started his company in, wait for it, 1955. He'd worked with DuPont. He left, started his own company in synthetic fibers. And he set up an organization based on the work of McGregor and Theory X and Theory Y, which is sort of old stuff now. But he was actually the creator of self-managed teams. And what you find is that self-managed teams, which network, are a great way of structuring for innovation. Structuring is a whole other issue, and I'm just really touching on it. But you do have to allow those two sets of behaviors. The creative behavior must not be interfered with. The execution behavior, the delivery behavior must be focused and get to market fast. So we have to structure so both can coexist.
Interesting. Yes, and you have some tools that you like to use to build innovation into the management system. Can you share a few of these tools and how they can be used?
Yeah. One of the primary tools is risk analysis. I always say innovation is a risky business. But risk analysis in innovation is different from risk analysis in the world of quality. In the world of quality, we do what we call failure mode and effect analysis, which looks at process. With innovation, we're looking into the future. So there are three classic strategy tools that we use. The SWOT analysis, which anybody can use, looks at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. In the world of quality, we would look at weaknesses and threats and do a risk analysis based on FMEA. In the world of innovation, we look at opportunity and we do a risk analysis on a tool called VUCA, VUCA. We look at the opportunity and we attribute what's the degree of volatility here. How much uncertainty is there? How much complexity is there? How ambiguous is the situation? That VUCA risk analysis is not new. It's widely used in the financial sector, and it's certainly the tool to use in the world of innovation. We use it in the same way as FMEA. We score it the same way, high, medium, and low risk. Actually, I like to score from 1 to 5. 5 for high risk, 1 for low risk. There's another tool that we can use as well as SWOT analysis, and that's called PESTLE analysis. That's more a tool for the larger companies. SWOT can be used by small companies. Larger companies will probably use PESTLE, which is looking at the politics, economics, sociology, technology, legal, and environmental changes that are going on. And that's very much market research stuff. And that's very much where you're likely to need a specialist. So I would usually say to a small company, stay with SWOT, go into risk. Once you've done your risk analysis, you then create probably the most vital tool of all for managing innovation, and that's the portfolio. And people who are project managers will be very familiar with portfolio. You put into the portfolio all the different elements of the innovation you're pursuing, or if you're pursuing multiple innovations, you put all the innovations in there. The portfolio will record what is the time to solution, what is the level of risk, what is the cost attached to it, and other factors. One of the critical parts of the portfolio is using it to evaluate resources. And we draw a line in the portfolio below which, if we haven't got resources, we're not going to pursue. The portfolio is constantly being updated as risk changes. As you progress through your innovation journey, you learn more, you reduce uncertainty, you reduce risk. So, critical tool, and it's a tool that anybody can use. The important thing is the discipline of using the portfolio.
Those are great ideas, and I like the breadth of complexity that you demonstrated as well, so that even the smallest of organizations, you know, can start with something that's maybe more familiar to them with that SWOT analysis, and just, you know, turning the perspective from a strategic planning sort of tool to more of an innovative planning and management tool. So you speak also about how important it is to know when to terminate an idea. And you touched on it just briefly there in the last response you gave, but how do organizations know when it's time to terminate or abandon an innovative idea?
And this comes back very much to the portfolio. And it's a question of being honest with ourselves. One of the challenges that startups have is that they're driven by passion. They believe in something. They deny reality. And the portfolio will overcome that, because in the portfolio, we look at all the factors that impact the idea, the opportunity. And we have that line in the sand, we'll call it, below which, if we haven't got the resources, we don't proceed. And as we move through the innovation journey, we learn more. We learn more accurately how much time is going to be needed before we finally get to market. We learn more accurately what is the cost of this. We learn overall whether risk is going up or whether risk is coming down. If we find that overall risk is not coming down and the time to market is not reducing, we have to start asking serious questions. If we find the time to market is increasing, there has to be a point at which we say, no, this is not going to happen. If the cost is increasing to the point that we haven't got the budget, we have to say either we stop or we find more financiers. And where small startups fail so badly is they run out of money. And of course, the big companies love it. They absolutely love it, because they can gobble up these small companies, which have got great ideas, but have run out of money. The company I ran in the UK, we went through very rapid growth. And I was fortunate that corporate funded my growth, because when you're growing, there are two things you need: money and people. My job was to find the right people. And that's just as tough as finding the money as well. So portfolio is the key to termination. And we have strict criteria written into the portfolio.
That's good advice and direction. And I'm just switching gears a little bit. What about metrics? How can organizations best measure their innovation outcomes?
Well, the classic metrics that we see are number of products less than 3 years old, profitability of new offerings, those sort of metrics, which quite frankly do not drive the innovation process. Historically, they're useful, but they are seriously lagging indicators. They don't drive the process. The metrics we need for innovation are at the input end. The metrics will be things like, how effective is our collaboration? What is the anticipated profitability on this new offering? And they may not be, should we say, crunchy numbers. They may be soft numbers. They may be binary, yes or no, or go, no go, or the classic project management metrics, which are red, yellow, green. But certainly, we should be measuring the effectiveness of our collaboration, our resource accessibility, the knowledge that we have that is relevant to the opportunity that we're seeking, and those sort of things, which are not necessarily going to be, measurements to the third decimal place. They'll be what I call soft metrics, but they're the most useful. They drive innovation. The lagging indicators are just telling you after the fact whether it worked.
Right. So, yeah, just more metrics that kind of feed your intuition or validate your intuition to some degree.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Peter, my last question for you is, how do you remain in the growth zone? What do you do to deepen your growth mindset?
Well, A lifetime of learning, I think, is the way to look at this. Two primary attributes for the leader of innovation are curiosity and courage. Innovators are always learning. They're always looking out there, they're always asking questions, but they're also willing to take risk. They're willing to step on the unsteady ground. And so the big challenge is that as you start to be successful, you become more risk averse. You're less willing to take risk. So your courage diminishes. Also, you have less time to go out there searching and learning. So we have to force that. I have to force this, taking time to step back and find space. And one of the things that does that is different for all of us, but I find travel forces me to step back and find space, because I'm moving to a different environment, a different world, and I find that suddenly my head clears and I'm able to look at things much more objectively. One other thing that I've learned, and that is the importance of mental acuity. Now there's a word, acuity, A-C-U-I-T-Y. In other words, having a sharp mind. And the secret for that, believe it or not, is sleep. And there tends to be a tradition of bragging about, oh, I can manage on 4 hours sleep. Well, okay. But people who do that pay a price. And I'm a great believer in sleep. And this might sound weird, but I get some of my best ideas when I'm asleep. There was a great program years ago on public television, a British program about the history of mathematics. And I think it was episode 3 was about the French mathematicians. And Descartes was one of the famous French mathematicians. And he used to do all his creative work in the morning, in bed, when his head was clear. So a clear head, get your own space, and always be learning. That's my counsel there.
That's very good advice. And I think it lends well to the topic of innovation and just being able to open your mind to all these ideas and the creative process. Thank you so much, Peter, for sharing your wisdom on innovation today. And I think that a lot of these concepts were very fascinating to me, because I always thought of innovation as something that's for the other artistic people and the more creative types. And now I have a different perspective on how even left brain accountants could apply some innovative ideas and processes to our work. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Tracey, and I've really enjoyed talking with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.